A confirmation about the audio, please. If the audio is clear and available, kindly confirm the same. Apologies for the delay, guys, and there were certain issues due to which we could not start in time. So humble apologies from my side. So don't worry, we'll cover it up from now. So here, uh, okay, the audio and video is clear for everyone. Can we proceed ahead? Okay, good. So now, while we have talked about the portion of biodiversity, it makes sense for us to be talking about the international conventions and organizations that deal with biodiversity at this stage itself. We shall not be separating it and keeping it separate for the time that those portions or the entire module of international conventions and organizations come into play, because there you will always be able to find a basic connect here. Always advisable that whenever you read any particular issue, whenever you come through any particular area, it is always advisable to interrelate those international conventions, the governing bodies, the international actions which are being pursued, and that will give you a larger ability to follow the portion of current affairs as well. Because the problem which arises with majority of the candidates, and I'll be very upfront and very frank about it, the problem with which arises and which most of the candidates faces, that we have studied the portion of the static that is simple, but it is the portion of current affairs which is very voluminous. It is the portion of current affairs which is very dynamic in the case of environment, and we are never able to keep track of it, or we are never able to hang on to it. So that is why here always I would say that just like the model that we pursued in the portion of pollution as well, that where we talked about the ozone hole depletion, there itself we talked about the Montreal Protocol, there itself we talked about the Vienna Convention, there also itself we talked about the aspect of the Kigali Amendment as well. When we were talking about the solid pollution and the intoxicants pollution, land pollution, etc., there itself we talked about the Stockholm Convention, we talked about the Rotterdam, Basel, all these conventions, we talked in that aspect itself. So here also, we'll follow the same kind of an approach. Here also, we'll be talking about the same aspect in the sense that once we have dealt with the portion of biodiversity, once you have understood the basics of the types of diversity, the species diversity, the genetic diversity, you have talked about the functional diversity, you have talked about the ecosystem engineers, the threats faced by the diversity, the mass extinctions that are there, the sixth mass extinctions which are initiated due to human actions. Once we are aware of that, then after that, any changes which keep on happening for the conventions, it will be easier to follow that. So as and when we talk about the various different international conventions, I will give you a heads up that whether this is going to be relevant only for your prelims, or these are the areas where you can have a foresight, a visibility that a question can be framed from this area in the mains examination as well. After all, you have to understand that UPSC is still going to be UPSC. It is still going to be very unpredictable. But then, based on the past trends and patterns, that is where we get the analysis from. Now, before that, if I have a general inquiry from you guys, so basically, I had suggested to you a few documentaries, a docu-series, a few of them to take a look whenever you have time. Any of you who has been doing that? Any of you who have been pursuing that particular aspect? Because with the changing pattern this year, what we found, or not only in this year but for the past couple of years also, we have seen that UPSC is diversifying its sources from where it is asking the questions. It is not restricted to a particular book. Ideal scenario would have been that there is a particular book or there is a particular content material from which only UPSC will ask the question, but sadly that is not the case. So UPSC has been diversifying its various different types of sources. So yes, few of you who've been doing that, good. So I want you to take a diversified opinion and a diversified source of information as well. So there have been few of the documentary series, there have been a few of the series which have been very popular across the world, and you will find that UPSC, for example, this year you had questions such as the orangutan. Now these questions became very popular in social media immediately, because that how is it that UPSC can ask such random questions? But it was directly from those particular aspects of how do we understand the biodiversity better. So always I would suggest to you, be unconventional in your approach, slightly unconventional in your approach. Don't simply follow the herd mentality that you see in the market, where they will simply, in the market of civil services, what is the prevalent norm is that people, they like buying books, they like buying bulky materials. If today I suggest to you that there is a 1,000 page book, immediately everybody will be interested to go to the market and to buy that. But that is not where the solution of succeeding in the examination comes from. UPSC nowadays, due to the, obviously you would also be aware of the recommendations made during the second ARC, and the second ARC report, I'm sure you would be studying for your ethics paper, etc. So there, the recommendation that was given to DOPT was, look, the type of candidates that you are sending to Labasna and the type of candidates that you are sending to the services, those are the candidates who have a kind of an approach of rote learning. So they are not the best problem solvers out there. So that is why the changing pattern is relying more upon the accumulated set of information to negate those book learners. So you have to keep up with the changing time. Otherwise, you will remain a kind of a dinosaur in this area. You will still find many of the people, they rely on simply rote learning the national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, etc., so that one odd question might be able to strike, or they might be able to solve one odd question out there. So again, I would suggest to you that there are certain documentaries such as Our Planet, such as Life on Earth, such as when we talk about our national parks. So these are your global docuseries. And there you get to understand the intricate relationship between the geographical realities which take place, and also the intricate relationship between how a particular region is experiencing the impact, and that impact is being translated into the existence of the various different biodiversity. So do take a look at that. Our Planet and the our national parks. Now Our Planet has come up with the second series and the second edition of it, which talks about the migration patterns indicated by the marine species, indicated by the terrestrial species. So the information that you gain from that, that is going to be very helpful. And it is from there that you find a couple of questions in the prelims also. And if you know that, if you are aware of those realities, then your ability to reproduce answers even in the mains examination, that increases at an exorbitant rate, right? You will be able to interrelate various aspects very easily. For example, if I tell you that the protected region in the region of Madagascar. Now, Madagascar is not something that you would cover in any of the areas of syllabus for civil services, right? So I'm just citing an example here. Now, Madagascar and the physical properties of Madagascar, if you are studying that in the portion of geography, obviously you have a kind of a misplaced priority, because then you will be left with endless amount of portions to cover, and you will spend your entire year only studying the portion of geography. So, for example, those areas which are not covered in any of the other portions. Now, if you are aware that in the region of Madagascar, you have a very unique rock formation, igneous rock formation, and those rocky areas, they have a kind of a resemblance to our western coastline, and that is indicated even in the coastline of Karnataka, where you have the St. Mary's Island. You will understand that why St. Mary's Island has been declared as a geoheritage site. So that interlinkage will automatically come. It will always give you a benefit, and also gaining a piece of information from visual approach, from the example approach, that is also much more advantageous. Okay, so always follow that kind of recommendation is something that I would like to suggest to you. I understand even after that I will get scores of emails that rather than that give me a PDF. I'm more comfortable in learning the PDF. But please understand, UPSC, what it was in 1990, the examination was not like that in 2000. What it was in 2000, the examination pattern changed in 2010. Without changing the syllabus, they did that. Then what the type of questions were being asked in 2014. Now, if you expect the same kind of questions to be asked in 2024 as well, then there is a kind of a reality check which needs to happen. Okay, so we will be discussing the PYQs along the way as well, in order to understand the type of questions that have remained consistent through the entire changing of these patterns as well. I want you to take a larger viewpoint. I want you to have a larger visibility that what is it that you see and I want you to be able to catch that trend that UPSC is following. Ideally, UPSC has not changed its pattern for almost a decade and more now, the syllabus, but the pattern is consistently evolving. So change along with the changing time. Okay. I get more negative marks. Don't know why. What is my fault? So that is not. Please don't. Um, in this case, don't get that victim mentality that something is wrong with me. That is something that every candidate goes through, and for everyone, I would suggest the same thing. Negative marks is something which is curable. When you carry out a negative marks or whenever after any test that you appear for, let's say that test that you have appeared for is for 2 hours. Ideally, if you are a serious candidate, if you are not a serious candidate, then fair enough, you will only be concerned about, okay, in this test series I have scored 78, in this test series I have scored 90. You will flaunt it to your family, you will get that pleasure and joy, and that is when you will be done with it. That will not solve the larger purpose. If let's suppose you have appeared for a test series for 2 hours, ideally you should spend close to around 2.5 or 2 hour 30 minutes to 3 hours analyzing that paper. And when you analyze that paper, first thing that you need to do is you need to classify those areas which you did not know. Because every test paper that you will appear for, there would be definitely those questions which you are not aware of. Even leave any test paper, even if I ask you guys, any of you guys, that set a test paper, set 100 questions out of any particular subject. I'm sure you'll be able to find certain areas which your competitors or your friends won't be aware of. That is what you do. So those areas that you are not aware of, those pieces of information that you have come across for the first time, rather than getting disheartened that I don't know much, first of all, take it in a constructive manner that now you know those things. So analyze those pieces of information. And first thing should be that those areas that I did not know, I will put it in a piece of paper in a very brief note ways manner, in a very brief note, maybe in a couple of pages for every test. I will do that. So if I take 30 tests before my prelims, I will have close to around 60 pages of notes of those pieces of information that I have not come across in my live classes or in the books that I have referred. Now, those will be my additional sources of information, additional reading material. Then, once you have done that, then classify your negative marks. Negative marks happens because of 2 or 3 reasons only. One reason is that you did not know and you took a random guess. So that again, write it down somewhere as an additional source of information. Second, you knew this, but you committed a mistake nonetheless. So why did you commit the mistake? So when you are marking the answer copy or the OMR sheet, there are only a couple of reasons why we commit mistakes. If you analyze that, if you have ever put attention to that. One reason is that we thought the interpretation of question was something, but the question actually was asking something else. So there is a wrongful interpretation which is done. Now, once you have done that, so let's suppose out of 50 negatives that I have done, if let's say 30 are those in those categories where I thought that the question is asking something else, but the question indeed was meaning something else. So there, classify it that, and you will find that there are certain subjects where you are consistently and certain topics where you are consistently not able to understand the requirement of the question. For example, polity is one of those areas. In polity, you have the topics such as fundamental rights, union parliament, where you have a lot of such questions which are framed where actually the examiner is asking something else, you have interpreted it something else. So that means you need to have more practice of MCQs for that subject, because the framing of the question is something which is troubling you. So once you have isolated that, you have understood where to improve. Second, the areas where we commit a lot of mistake is that after sitting for 1 hour or 15 minutes, or after going through, let's say, 4 or 5 such questions where we did not know what the answer is, suddenly we come across a topic which we know and we rush to a conclusion. There's a lapse in concentration that we tend to skip certain important keywords which were hidden in the question itself, but we fail to analyze that. So that means there's a lapse of concentration which is happening. So analyze. When is it that a lapse of concentration is happening? Is it happening after, now many of the times it will happen in the prelims as well. Let's suppose you have got a paper set C or a paper set, any of them. Now the questions which are framed there, it can happen that first couple of pages you might not know any of the answers. Immediately it gives you a setback that how will I succeed in this examination? 2 pages have gone, 8 questions have gone, I did not know anything. So when is that lapse of concentration happening? Is it happening after a prolonged sitting? Is it happening after, let's say, you have gone through these setbacks? So then work upon those aspects to maintain your mental focus. Once you approach this particular examination in this scientific manner, trust me, there is nothing which is going to stop you. Because I will bust another myth now, if you allow me. So, and that will be cross-utilizable in other areas as well. 100 questions appear in the prelims examination. What is the cutoff marks? This year, the cutoff marks is expected to be somewhere between the range of 82 to 85. That is going to be the cutoff marks, right, for the prelims. So out of 100 questions, cutoff is 82 to 85. That means effectively, UPSC expects you to get how many questions correct? Effectively, if you have done around 45 questions or 45 answers as correct, you are through, right? That is the basic requirement. Now, out of these 100 questions, understand how the questions are distributed every year. You will have close to around 40 to 45. And this is something which is always there. 40 to 45 questions from the basics. Be it polity, be it geography, be it economy, be it anything. 40 to 45 will be directly from the basics. Then you will have around 20 to 25 which are logic based. And what do I mean by logic based? That means these will be from those topics, the topic name you might have heard, the topic you might have come across, but you might never have come across the content of that topic. You might never have come across that framing in which the topic has been framed. That is where you have the 20 to 25 questions which are framed from that particular portion, where if you apply your logic, that whether in this government scheme, can this be possible, that the government takes care of all the people? Can it be practical? So that is where these 20 to 25 chunks come from. Now, for the past year and this year as well, what is also being observed is that you have around 20 to 25. Now, this might vary. Okay. So 20 questions which are very factual. That if you know it, you know it. If you have not come across it, even if UPSC would have given you 2 extra months, you would have not known it. Okay. So there are such 20 questions. There's no denying the fact. The problem arises is when we take or when we analyze the PYQs, we focus only on attaining the information on these 20. And trust me, these 20 very factual ones, they change every year. Change every year. Their domains, they change every year, right? So you can have extremely factual questions. For example, flapping of the wings by the honeybees. That gives you an indication of where the food is or what is the distance of the food. That is very factual. That is a very niche area. Now, elephants, what is the gestation period for the young ones? That is again very factual. Now, and for example, if I can cross-reference it from the portion of geography as well. Now, in geography, you have had certain questions that, okay, which of these particular minerals are minor minerals? Now, these are very, very factual. If you base your preparation on this, there are a couple of problems that you expose yourself to. First problem is that you will be covering such a large area of syllabus. You will be increasing your work so much that you won't be able to pay attention to these basics, you won't be able to revise these basics, and secondly, you won't be able to revise even these areas, and you are not sure whether UPSC will repeat those questions next year or those kinds anywhere. So ideally, if you want to succeed in this examination, capitalize on this and this portion. So ideally, if you have 45 questions coming from the basics of 45, 47, that is max that UPSC will ask from the basics. So in this, your effort should be that at max, and this will come only with practice, at max 5 negative. That is what you have to ensure. That at max in these basic questions. So even if I ask you certain set of questions from the chapter that you have read 100 times, even then you will make a mistake. Any odd individual who comes to you and tells you that in this area I've never made a mistake, they are lying or they are not serious about the exam. You will make mistakes, but restrict your mistakes. So in this, by this method, you will be able to get around 35 to 40 questions correct. That automatically takes you to the range of 70 to 80. Okay. Then out of the 20 to 25, these are also based on current affairs. Based on current affairs. So if you have followed the portion of current affairs religiously well, if you have basically tried to understand that, or if you have understood the simple basic aspect of UPSC, that UPSC is not your class 10th examination where you have a book, questions will be framed from the book, that is it. Those books are just to give you an overview. After that, you are supposed to solve it on your own. So out of these 20 to 25, around 15 to 20 or 15 to 18, you will be able to do it correctly. Let's assume you are able to do it in a lower range. Let's assume 10 to 15. Even that takes your correct proportion of questions to how much? It takes you somewhere in the range of 45 to 55 correct. Automatically, that is it. Now, let's say these factual questions. Out of these factual questions, maybe you know 5 of them. Out of the 25 factual questions, you know 5 of them. Not 25, only 5 or only 4. So that will automatically increase your marks and it will give you enough leg room to succeed in this examination. So the key to this examination is understand what this examination is. Sun Tzu had famously said that the key to defeat your enemy in a battle is to understand your enemy first. Otherwise, you might win the battle, but you will lose the war. So understand what UPSC is trying to get at, why it is trying to frame the question that it is trying to frame. It is very easy to have a complaint in that regards that, UPSC is becoming very random nowadays. Fair enough, it is becoming random. But never was this examination considered to be very easy. Even 20 years back, 30 years back, 50 years back, 100 years back, never had this examination had been considered to be easy. It is a tough exam. But how to conquer this? You have to be smart. Okay? So I hope that assuages some of the doubts and some of the anxieties that we have. Any other doubts that we have? No? Okay. Good. Right. So it is not only about practicing, it is also about that analysis. That analysis is very important. Okay. Without that analysis, you'll keep on practicing, and you have many of such people flaunting in the market that I have appeared for the 50 test series. I have appeared for 100 tests. I will automatically get through. That doesn't happen. Okay. You will find these people present in the market year after year after year. So analyze and you will feel the change. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about these conventions, first thing that we will do is the Bonn Convention or the CMS. That is the Convention on Migratory Species. Now, before that, what do we understand as a difference between a convention and a protocol? A convention and a protocol, they are different from each other, and you have to understand that. So when we say a convention, In the case of a convention, you have a larger group of parties who will come together and they will set an objective. And there they will decide that we will work towards this objective. So here, goal setting, or let me utilize the previous slide for this case. So when we talk about conventions, so that is where you have goal setting or objectives. Objectives are set and decided. Future path is laid. That we will basically work towards this. For example, you have the Ramsar Convention. We will protect the wetlands. You have, for example, the Vienna Convention. That is, we will protect the ozone layer. Right? So that is the convention on migratory species. We will prevent or preserve those migratory species. Then, for example, you have the convention on biological diversity. We will preserve the biological diversity. That is a convention. But how do you do that? How do you preserve that? How do you achieve that objective? So that entire pathway is laid with the help of the target setting, etc. And that is where the protocols come in. So the protocols here, when we talk about the protocol is always a measure or a path with timed or timely achievable targets and a fixed timeline. So that is what we have as a protocol. So any convention, how it has to be achieved, for that you need certain protocols. It's not always required, but in majority of the cases, you'll find the protocols which follow that. So for example, you had the Vienna Convention followed by a Montreal Protocol. You had, for example, when we talk about the framework convention on climate change, you have the Kyoto Protocol for that. So that is how the protocols come into existence. I hope this portion is clear. The difference between a convention and a protocol. Any doubts that persist in this area? No? Okay. When we take a look at the various different protocols and conventions, this will get better and you will have a better visibility and understanding with the help of the examples as well. So here, we start with the Convention on Migratory Species, which is also referred to as the Bonn Convention. Now, this is relevant for your prelims exam. Not so much for your mains examination, but this is relevant for your prelims examination. Now, before understanding the intricacies of this, the appendices, etc., which have been set by this, let us first of all understand why this convention was needed. This was brought about in the 70s itself, late 70s itself, was when this Bonn Convention was brought in. Now, earlier also, while we were talking about the responses to the migration and the aspect of migration which is carried out by the various different species, they are responses to the changing abiotic factors. Why is it that the species migrate? Because the abiotic factors, they keep on changing, and the species, they are forced to migrate from one region to another. So here, when we talk about the Convention on Migratory Species, for example, or CMS, you have to understand that let's suppose a particular area, this is their natural habitat. Let's suppose natural habitat. Now, a species of a bird, animal, terrestrial animal, or a marine animal, let's suppose, when the conditions become very harsh, they migrate to here. Migration. Right? Now, if this particular habitat where they have migrated to, Now, here, if let's suppose they are hunted, they are poached. Here you are carrying out their maximum protection, but here they are hunted. Or in the case of the birds, or in many of the animals as well, in the migratory path itself, if they are hunted. Let's suppose we talk about the migratory route or the migratory path. So in the migratory path itself, if they are hunted, then what will happen? How will you be able to conserve the species then? You cannot simply create fences and borders in this region and expect the species to survive, right? So that is how, or that is the reason why many of the species, for example, you have a bird species such as sociable lapwing. Earlier also I have given the example of sociable lapwing, which is a kind of a small bird, slightly larger than the size of a sparrow, if you can gather that. Now that sociable lapwing is something which is very, very commonly found, and its natural habitat is the region of Central Asia. Now, in Central Asia, it becomes very hot or very cold during the winter months. So the availability of food substantially reduces. So that is where these species, they migrate to warmer regions such as the wetland region in Gujarat, some of the areas in Rajasthan. Now, there is a degradation of habitat in those migrated areas, then naturally these species, due to lack of food, due to lack of proper nourishment, or maybe even the toxicants and the contaminants that they consume, their population keeps on reducing. So that is why there was a requirement for the convention to be brought about for the conservation of migratory species. So that is your Bonn Convention. Now, this convention was basically arrived at in 1979 itself. Okay, that is when this convention was arrived at. It came into force in 1983. Now, when you are preparing for your prelims, please don't keep a track of when is it that it was enforced. UPSC has not been asking those questions, so please don't overcomplicate the things that you have to learn. So just understand when this convention was basically arrived at. And what is the aim or the objective for this? So, conserve terrestrial, marine, and avian migratory species and their habitat throughout their range, throughout the range where they will be moving, or throughout the range where they will be traveling. Now, what are the objectives set by the Bonn Convention? Adoption of strict protection measures for the endangered migratory species. So, you need to conserve them, first of all. Wherever you conserve them, you need to conserve them. Secondly, multilateral agreements and arrangements between different countries, because obviously the boundaries of the nation state, they don't work for the animals and the organisms. So the multilateral arrangements between various different countries, right? Between different countries in the path or the range of migration. Okay, so management of migratory species, cooperative research activities, etc. That is the aspect here. Then the convention ideally has got two appendices. So here, appendix 1 and appendix 2. You have appendix 1 and appendix 2. So when you talk about appendix 1, it basically goes ahead to list the migratory species that are classified as endangered with high risk of extinction, and urgent international cooperation is actually required. So here it is about conservation, identifying the species for conservation. So these are those species which have a very high risk of extinction. Appendix 2, it lists the other species that would benefit significantly, right? So these are not immediately threatened with extinction, but then they would benefit. So these are not immediately threatened with extinction. Not immediately threatened with extinction. Now, here again, the areas that you have to take a note of whenever you are going through any of these organizations, any of these conventions, the areas that you have to keep a track of. So, first of all, the convention has legally binding agreements and also non legally binding MOUs, right? So if you arrive at an MOU, memorandum of understanding, MOU is memorandum of understanding. So if you have arrived at an MOU with any particular country, that is not very legally binding, but the norms of convention, they are legally binding. So here, that is the aspect in this. India has been a part of the Bonn Convention since 1983. India is the present president of the Conference of Parties for the Bonn Convention till this year. Now, for any convention, you will have a secretariat as well, the one who will carry out the day-to-day activities, the day-to-day work for that convention, the normal work which needs to be carried out. Now, there is a decision-making body. For any convention, there will be a high-level decision-making organization, a decision-making body. Now, that decision-making body or organization, now that is in charge of the all the major decisions, goal setting, etc. So this decision-making organization or body which meets, that is what is the conference of parties. That is what we have as conference of parties. So conference of parties to a convention, they will be represented by the ministers of the individual countries or the bureaucrats, administrators of the various different countries. So that is your conference of parties. So this is the highest decision making body. Highest decision making body. Okay. Now, here in India, you have these species which basically are given protection under the CMS. Now, here again, I understand there will be a kind of a query that, yes, it is already there, that whether do we need to learn all these or not. So again, I would suggest that these are not significantly large in number, so you can have a basic look, but please don't rely upon this only, because again here, as is the trend even with IUCN, with any of the cases, as we have consistently harped and concentrated upon the fact, it is the basic aspect of current affairs, the fresh additions and removal which have happened, or there is any fresh news that you encounter where due to a convention or the protection measure given in the convention, there is an increase in their population, etc. So only in those current affairs additions do you need to keep a track of that. Otherwise, you can let it go. Okay. Now, then we come to an important one, that is the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is relevant for your prelims. This is relevant for your mains examination as well. Chances are that in this year's mains examination, you might find a question on this Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, what is this convention? How was it arrived at? So basically, and we will study about it in detail, or the entire arrival of this convention, the chronology of the various different conventions in the next couple of modules as well. But basically, this is a convention which was arrived at the Rio Summit, which is also referred to as the Earth Summit of 1992. So that is where the genesis or the origin or the birth of this convention lies at. So it was arrived at the Rio Summit. Rio Summit, it is named as Rio Summit. Basically, it was the Earth Summit or a summit. Summit is what? Summit is a kind of a meeting where you have the highest levels of members, in the sense that you have the heads of state who take part in that. So G20 Summit. So that is your summit meeting where you have the heads of state, all of those heads of organizations, they take a part in that. So you had the Earth Summit or the Rio Summit, which was held when? It was held in 1992. Now, in this Earth Summit and Rio Summit, you had three different documents which were arrived at, which would define the entire purpose of conservation and our future pathway to be taken as well. But along with that, you also had in this particular summit, the aspect where you had three different and three important conventions which were arrived at. So in this convention, you have, or in this summit, you had three conventions which were arrived at. So what were those three conventions? You basically had Convention on Biological Diversity. This is to protect the biodiversity. You had United Nations Convention to combat desertification. This was to combat desertification. And what was the third convention? Any of us, if we are aware of that? What was the third convention which was arrived at, which is very, very famous and something that the current affairs consistently is balked with? Yes, perfect, Ankit. So here you had United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was a convention on climate change. On climate change. Okay, so that is where all these conventions, they have their origin from this one summit. Okay, so it is these conventions where the frequent current affairs news, they start and keep on coming in, and that is where it worries us. But that is the genesis or the origin of them all. So this convention on biological diversity was arrived at in 1992. Now here, what is it? So it is an international treaty that was adopted at the Earth Summit in 1992. The convention recognized for the first time in international law that the conservation of biological diversity is a common concern of humankind, a common goal which is desired to be achieved, and an integral part of the development process. Okay, so here basically it has got three main goals or objectives. What are the three goals? Conservation of biological diversity or biodiversity that needs to be conserved. Second, sustainable use of its components. What do we mean by that? Sustainable use of the components. When you use the biodiversity or when you introduce a particular biodiversity into any particular ecosystem, now there has to be multiple different implications that you have to keep in mind. So it is about using that biodiversity or having that utility of biodiversity in such a manner that it doesn't damage the environment in the long run. So this also includes the living modified organisms. So you have various different type of genetic modifications which is being done on an experimental basis, and various different genetic modifications which are done. So there you need to have a kind of a careful approach. You cannot simply put an organism or you have genetically modified an organism and simply introduce it into the wild. Then it can have disastrous impacts. So that is where sustainable use of the components is one of the chief goals. And this includes the living modified organisms. Includes living modified organisms. Okay, then you have fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from genetic resources. Understand this again. Fair and equitable sharing. This is one component of what? Of benefits arising from genetic resources. Now, for every genetic resources, there will be certain associated benefits. For example, let's suppose in your locality, let's suppose you have a forested area. Now, in that forested area, let's suppose you have certain very rare plant species which are in existence, certain very rare kind of plant species which are found to be present and prevalent there. Now, how do you utilize them? Now, it might happen that or a particular multinational company knows about a particular drug formulation, etc., which can be described from that, or which can be extracted, which can be manufactured from that plant. Now, immediately, what will happen? Let's suppose there's a plant which you discover in your local forest area, which has got the ability to cure diseases such as asthma, bronchitis easily. Now, immediately, what will happen? All those companies will rush into that area to extract that biological resource, that genetic resource. But then, what about the local community? Will the local community benefit out of it? If the local community doesn't benefit out of it, will the local community ever be interested in that protection? So, this also identifies the role of conservation, or the role of the local community, the local population being a stakeholder in that process of conservation. Unless and until the local community takes part in that conservation, then conservation cannot be long lasting. Right. So, if you have a benefit associated with a genetic resource, then distribute it. Give the benefit to the local community as well. Only then they will feel a part of it. Only then they will start to put in efforts to carry out the conservation on their end as well. So the that is aimed at ensuring benefits for the local community, and also to make them a part of the conservation process. To make them a part of the entire conservation process. So these were the goals. Now, ideally, whenever you talk about a convention sets goals. Now you have to achieve those goals. So how do you attain or achieve those goals? With the help of protocols. So in order to achieve this second goal, that is the sustainable use of the components, that is where you have the Cartagena protocol. That is where the Cartagena protocol was arrived at. Okay. Then overall, you will also observe that you have the fair and equitable sharing is a goal. Now, to achieve that goal, you have the Nagoya protocol, which was arrived at. Nagoya protocol. So overall, conservation of biological diversity is encapsulated by these two goals which are present. Okay, so that is an important part of this. I hope this larger picture is clear, so that I don't want you to get confused when you get exposed to the details of Cartagena protocol, etc. I don't want you to mix and match all of them, that what is it and why this, what is the difference between this protocol and that protocol. So it is basically in order to achieve these goals. So for CBD, you will have two protocols which are there to attain the goals of CBD. One is the Cartagena protocol for sustainable use of biodiversity, and second, and its other forms, and second is the Nagoya protocol of fair and equitable sharing of benefits of the genetic resources. Okay. Now, here, when we talk about it, it covers the rapidly expanding field of biotechnology, because it is with the help of biotechnology that you are able to arrive at the various genetic modifications that you have in the case of the many of the different species of plants, many of the different species of animals also. Now, there is role of biotechnology. So, rapidly expanding field of biotechnology through the Cartagena protocol on biosafety. Okay, where is Cartagena, by the way? Are we aware where is Cartagena? It is a place. I hope we are aware of that. So find it out. Okay, have this task to yourself, find it out where is Cartagena situated, and that is where this protocol was arrived at. Now, addressing technology development and transfer, benefit sharing, and biosafety issues. Now, importantly, this convention is legally binding. Countries that join it are obliged to implement its provisions. Okay, so it is legally binding. Okay, now let us take a look at these protocols, starting with the Cartagena Protocol. So, Cartagena Protocol, this is the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. And always you have the, when you name the protocol, it is the protocol to the convention. So, Cartagena Protocol on biosafety to the convention on biological diversity. That is how you name the protocol. Yes, it is in Colombia. Right. You would have I don't know, I'll not take the name of the series, but you have many of the TV series which frequently talk about Cartagena, in the sense the TV series linked with Colombia. And I hope you would have seen the TV series for Pablo Escobar. So that is where Cartagena is multiple times used. So Cartagena has been in news for the conservation of biological diversity, because it is in these equatorial and tropical regions where the biodiversity conservation is oftentimes deemed to be very important and is talked about. Yes, sir. That is the TV series I'm talking about. So here you have the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. And it is the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety to the Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, what is this? It is an international agreement which aims to ensure the safe handling, safe transport, and use of the LMOs. What do we mean by LMOs? Living modified organisms resulting from modern biotechnology, that is, genetic modification where it is carried out. Genetic modification wherever it is carried out, that may have adverse effect on biological diversity, taking also into account risks to human health. Okay, risks to human health. So there, when you genetically modify an organism, that organism might have greater capabilities, might have a different mechanism of handling various threats. So it might outperform the competition in that area very easily. So that is where you do need to have a check on what is the impact on biodiversity that it will create. That is very essential. Okay. You need to have a check on the impact of biodiversity. Now, how do you do that? So, for example, let's suppose this is a country where you have developed a living modified organism. And let's suppose you consider a country like India. Now, if you have to directly transfer it to India, now you cannot do that without damaging and hampering the biodiversity in India. So for this, you establishes an advance informed agreement procedure, AIA as it is referred to. So you have a biosafety clearing house. So in this country, for example, here India will have a biosafety clearing house. Clearing house. Now, this biosafety clearing house, it will analyze the various different data pointers, sources of information, that what is the impact that this particular organism will have on the local biodiversity. How is it that the local biodiversity will impact it? All those it will basically take care of. And after the biosafety clearinghouse gives the go ahead, after that, these two nations, they will sign an AIA. Okay, AIA is signed. Okay, now after that AIA is signed, that is when you will then carry out the process. Now, what is the role? The role is so as to ensure that the country in which the biodiversity or the genetic modification is being transported, that country is fully aware of all the implications that you have of the transferring of the biodiversity. So here establishes the AIA procedure, ensuring that the countries are provided with the piece of information necessary to make an informed decision before agreeing to the import of such organisms within their territories. Now, this protocol also establishes a biosafety clearinghouse to facilitate the exchange of information on the various LMOs and assist the countries to implement the protocol. Which protocol? The Cartagena Protocol to Biosafety, or the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety to the CBD. It was adopted in 2000 and entered into force in 2003. When did it enter into force? Not very important for you to learn or remember. Okay. Now, this was the protocol which was arrived at to achieve this measure. But what about this particular aspect? That is fair and equitable fair and equitable access to benefit sharing. So here you have the Nagoya Protocol. That is to achieve the third goal. So it is an international agreement aims at sharing the benefits arising from utilization of genetic resources in a fair and equitable manner, including by appropriate access to the genetic resources and by appropriate transfer of relevant technology as well. So, if you have, let's say, a new medicinal plant discovered in India, you cannot have an MNC working in Germany directly extracting those medicinal plants without transferring that source of information to India as well. This ensures that there is not a great amount or there is not exploitation which is carried out, right? Because historically most of the developed nations have carried out incessant amount of such kind of exploitation. So this is to stop that kind of exploitation to be happening. Okay. Now, here in this Nagoya Protocol, this was a meeting which was held in 2010. Okay, so Cartagena Protocol was arrived at in 2000. This was arrived at in 2010. Now, at this particular meeting, you had a lot of people, or basically, a lot of concern was about the conservation of biodiversity. How do we conserve the biodiversity? So, in order to conserve the biodiversity, first of all, you need to bring them into the mainstream conversation. You need people to be talking about that. You need people to have that conversation and the policymakers to have that regular conversation. Only then will they ever try to bring that into the form of the policy measure at all. So, and for example, you need to protect the habitats, you need to prevent the fragmentation of habitats. So there were various different measures which were arrived at this meeting, which was not a part of the protocol, it was just a part of the meeting. So at that meeting, you also had various different people agreeing on the fact that what are the necessary steps which need to be taken in order to conserve the biodiversity. And that is where you had the 20 new biodiversity targets which were decided and termed as the HE biodiversity targets. Okay, this was a strategic plan, 10-year targeted plan to ensure proper conservation of biodiversity. Okay, that was the aspect of Nagoya Protocol. Now, it was adopted by the Conference of Parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity at its 10th meeting that was held in 2010. So, please understand, HE targets are not a part of the Nagoya Protocol. It was simply decided at this particular meeting. Now, HE targets, they were relevant only up till 2020. They set a targeted plan to be achieved by 2020. Right? Now, here you have these HE targets. So these were divided, these 20 targets were divided within 5 different strategic goals. This is not very relevant for your examination now. This is just to give you an overview. So, first of all, the strategic goal A would be to address the underlying cause of biodiversity loss. Now, remember, we have discussed the various different factors which end up causing a significant loss to biodiversity. So, the underlying causes of biodiversity loss and mainstreaming biodiversity across the government and the society. So mainstreaming means bring that into conversation. So improve awareness of biodiversity, mainstream biodiversity in your conversation and policy making, reform incentives, implement plans for sustainability. All of that was then talked about in strategic goal A. Strategic goal B would talk about to reduce the pressure on biodiversity and promote the sustainability of biodiversity. So reduce habitat loss and degradation of habitat, sustainable fishing, because overfishing is one of the significant causes of the depletion of the marine biodiversity. So sustainable fishing, it is after this that a norm developed, particularly in the region of Mediterranean Sea, where all the fishermen involved in that particular area, they carry out fishing activities for a particular set of period. After that, they give a break. They give a break to allow the fishes to regenerate their population, and then they would carry out the fishing again. Make farming and forestry sustainable, reduce pollution. So all the various things which will impact the biodiversity both in the short and the long run, that is something which is to be addressed, or which was to be addressed. Then improve the status of biodiversity by safeguarding the ecosystem. So protect and manage critical sites, prevent extinctions, maintain genetic diversity. Then enhance the benefits to all from the biodiversity. So safeguard the services provided by the biodiversity, right? So this is restore the degraded forest, implement the access and benefit sharing that you have, and then implement the biodiversity protection plans, the action plans that you have, traditional knowledge, share biodiversity knowledge. These formed a part of the Nagoya Protocol. Or not the Nagoya Protocol, rather, pardon me for that, the HE targets. Now, do you need to learn these HE targets? Absolutely not. Do you need to have a clue what these HE targets are? Yes, because it can always be asked in your mains examination that what were the HE targets. So these were a set of 20 targets for conservation of biodiversity up till around 2020. So that is the larger viewpoint that you need to extract from this. So this will be the strategic goals you need to know, but the 20 sub goals that you have, that is something which is not very important. Okay, I hope that larger context is understood. Now, if I ask you the question, what do you think? These goals, were they met? Were they achieved? Or were they not achieved? What do you think? Were these goals achieved? Good. It was not achieved. Whenever you have any global goal setting, it is generally understand it and follow it as a thumb rule. It is never achieved. Now, when it is not achieved, what do? You set fresh goals, right? So, for example, let's suppose if your parents tell you that cover this particular, or if I tell you cover this particular portion in this month, if you're not able to do so, what do? You set a more aggressive goal or a different goal for next month, right? So that is what has been done. Now, in this case also, when we talk about the Convention on Biological Diversity, they set this HE targets to be achieved by 2020 in order to conserve the biodiversity. So that was a kind of a framework up till around 2020. But what to do after 2020? So for that, the convention was to meet again to decide the goals to be set after 2020. But we all know what happened in 2020. What did we have? We had the one of the worst global pandemics of all. We suffered from the COVID pandemic. So obviously, in that background, no meeting could be conducted, no meeting could be held because of the COVID pandemic. Now, always there was a lingering thought that we need to have a kind of this target setting for the future. So that is when in 2021, in December 2021, the Conference of Parties was supposed to meet at Kunming in China. Now, this meeting was not very conclusive. This meeting was not very conclusive because various different parties, they did not agree to a common agenda. And some portion of work was done for setting up of a global biodiversity framework, which would work for the conservation of biodiversity for almost the next 30 years up till 2050, and also set a target for the next 10 years, just like the case of HE. So some work was done, but it was not finalized. It was decided that next year, that is in 2022, we will again sit together and we will come upon a conclusion. But in the month of November, when this meeting was supposed to be held, now we all know what was the condition experienced in China. Now, even though China did not tell the world about it, but you had massive amount of outbreak of COVID pandemic, which finally took place in China. And you had such stringent lockdowns, and there was large scale disappearance. Many of the patients who declared that they were COVID positive, they overnight they disappeared, never to be found again. So these things are very common in China overall. So that is where in China, the meeting could not be held. So you had a virtual meeting with few of the members taking a part in the secretariat of this convention. Secretariat of this convention is in Montreal in Canada. So that is where eventually that global biodiversity framework, which was to set the goal for up till 2050, along with the targets up for the next 10 years up till 2030, that was decided, and that is what was referred to as the Kunming-Montreal Agreement, which was a part of the Conference of Parties, or the 15th Conference of Party to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So it was convened under the auspices of United Nations. It was chaired by China and hosted by Canada. The 15th Conference of Parties to the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity adopted the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and target setting to be achieved by 2030. Now here you had 4 goals and 23 targets. So here, what were the goals? So again, if you analyze, if you have paid attention to the discussion of the HE targets, here also if you analyze, the goals are very similar. They are almost the same, barring a couple of differences. We will talk about those differences as well. So halt in the human-induced extinction, right? Increasing area of natural ecosystem by 2050. Maintaining the genetic diversity. Genetic diversity, we have already talked about last week as well, that why genetic diversity is very pertinent, very important to ensure a large-scale conservation. Then, sustainably restoring the ecosystems, fair and equitable sharing of benefits from the genetic resources. Then, the goal which was different from the HE one was aligning financial flows with global environment facility or the global biodiversity framework, the 2050 vision. This GBF is basically what stands for Global Biodiversity Framework. Global Biodiversity Framework. Okay, that is the goal D, right? This is a part of CBD itself. Observe this. This is the so I had told you that conference of parties is the highest decision making of the any convention. So under CBD, so the convention was arrived at in 1992. Now after that also the convention has to work. So you have the meeting and the conference of parties. Decision making is done. Making is done when or by whom? It is done by the Conference of Parties, COP. Now that Conference of Party is going to meet every 2 to 3 years. So this Conference of Party, in this case of CBD, meets every 2 to 3 years. In the case of UNFCCC or the Convention on Climate Change, they will meet every year. So here they don't meet every year. So there you had the COP 15, 15th Conference of Party. That is what is referred to as the Kunming Montreal Agreement. Is that understood now? Kunming Montreal Agreement. See, I want you to understand the pattern behind it. Please don't try to simply rote learn it, because then you will get confused, you will forget very easily. Now, the targets are reducing the threats to biodiversity, meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing, tools and solutions for implementation, and mainstreaming of biodiversity as well. So let us take a look at few of the targets that have been set for reducing the threat to biodiversity. So here, to bring the loss of areas of high biodiversity importance, loss of such areas which are very important for biodiversity, to bring the loss of such areas close to zero by 2030. Okay, then you have another 30 by 30 target. What is the 30 by 30 target? The 30 by 30 target is to bring 30% of areas of the planet under conservation, some or the other form of conservation, under conservation by 2030. So that is your 30% of the area of the land, water body, etc. They have to be brought under conservation by the year 2030. Okay. Then to halt human induced extinction, right? The anthropogenic factors such as pollution, etc., which will bring about a significant amount of extinction, you have to bring that to a stop. Impact of invasive alien species. We have already discussed that invasive alien species have a significant impact when it comes to the loss of biodiversity. It is one of the biggest threats for the loss of biodiversity. So, reduce the impact of the invasive species by 50% by 2030. So, overall, to reduce the impact created by these invasive species by around 50%, reduce pollution risk and minimize the impact of climate change. Now, responsibilities for this have also been given for the financial flows, etc., and also for the sustainable handling of the biodiversity. Responsibility has been for the first time fixed with the big organizations, the big corporates as well. So here you have large and transnational companies and the financial institutions. So they have to regularly monitor, assess, and then transparently disclose their risks, dependencies, and impacts on biodiversity. Okay, then they have to disclose the impact that they have on biodiversity. Provide the information needed to consumers to promote sustainable consumption pattern. Because if you are aware, let's suppose you consume a particular product. Let's suppose you are consuming any of these products. Think about it. Let's take the case of plywood, right? Now when you open up the TV in order to watch any particular sports, any particular movies, or even news headlines, immediately you will be flooded with the advertisements of plywood companies, that this plywood if you use, you will not get any diseases. This plywood if you use, your house will be very lucky. If this plywood you use, you may clear civil services as well. So there are various different advertisements. Now if suppose you get an idea that any of these companies, they are destroying the environment in the process, so always you will, not everyone, but most of them will end up making a smart choice in the process, that I will choose the product which doesn't damage the environment. So when will it happen? If the companies or the organizations, they disclose it, that is where transparency comes in. They disclose it. Now, if they disclose it, or if they don't, if they basically choose to disclose it, then what will happen? In a way, they will also be encouraged to go for a better method of production, a sustainable method of production and utilization as well, isn't it? So it goes in a long way. So provide information needed to consumers to promote sustainable consumption patterns. Report on compliance with access and benefit sharing regulations, whether the companies have been following the access and benefit sharing, in the sense that if a pharmaceutical company is exploiting a particular resource or using a particular resource from a country, whether the local population is benefiting out of it or not. That is the aspect of this. Okay. Then you have few of the additional features. Now, many countries like India and also many of the developing and underdeveloped nations, they made a larger pitch. And the pitch was that do one thing, establish a special trust fund to implement the measures of the global biodiversity framework and name it as a GBF fund. Why? Because if I can take you back to the basics of the agreement here, again, the Rio summit, all these three conventions which were arrived at in Rio, now the funding and the financing of them, for that you have a separate body which was established. And what was that body? What was that organization? That was your GEF, Global Environment Facility. With World Bank as its trustee, this was the organization which was for the established for funding mechanism for the convention. By the way, the GEF does not only take care of the funding of these conventions, the other convention, one other convention that we studied, and we have studied it earlier, I don't know if we recall it or not. So we have studied another convention, that is the Stockholm Convention, if you remember. Stockholm Convention was for what? Minamata as well, correct. So Stockholm Convention was for what? It was for POPs, the persistent organic pollutants. Good. So these POPs, the Stockholm Convention, Minamata, and also for Montreal, the funding is given by GEF. It is monitored by GEF. But then, obviously, you have to understand that this particular aspect of funding has not been very fluent. The rich countries, they have promised it, but then it has not been realized. Where I promise that I will give you 10,000 rupees, but I don't give you 10,000 rupees at the end of the day. So that is where it has not been realized in the process. So that is where this the countries, they requested that, look, GEF is not working as it should. So better to establish a special trust fund, GBF fund. But this was not established. Till now, it has not been established. Okay? Not finalized till now. Then it obligates countries to monitor and report every 5 years or less. That is, what is the status of biodiversity and the conservation and protection measures for biodiversity. What is the status of that? So this is also important measure which has been added. That is the reportage. Reportage to be done every 5 years or less. By 2030, mobilizing at least 200 billion US dollars per year, including the international financial resources, including the domestic resource mobilization, and also by leveraging for the private finance. So these are the funding mechanisms which have been established. Okay, so that is the aspect of the CBD. Now, in order to attain or in order to achieve the goals of CBD, you do need a national legislation to be in place. And in order to implement this, the national legislation which was passed was what? It was the Biodiversity Act of 2002. So that Biodiversity Act of 2002, that was basically implemented, that was passed in order to implement the goals of the suggestion. That is why when we will study about the Biodiversity Act, there also you will see that the objectives of the Biodiversity Act are same as the CBD. Okay, so that is how you can relate the national and the international legislations. Then we come at sites. Now this is relevant for your prelims. UPSC has asked questions from this in prelims multiple times earlier as well. So this is where it will be relevant for your prelims examination. So for your prelims exam, you have to understand what are the aspects of this particular sites or this particular convention. What is it all about? So here, it is the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, wild flora and fauna. Now, what is the meaning of that and why has it been arrived at? Because it has been understood, it was understood that many of the species have been pushed at the threat of extinction because of the illegal trade which is happening, because of the illegal trafficking which is happening. For example, in the case of rhinos, it is the rhino horn. For example, in the case of elephants, it is the basic ivory, right? So that is being extracted. So in the case of the tigers, it was the skin of the tiger. So that is where you have that illegal trade, which is endangering the survivability of the species in the larger scale. And for their conservation, and you had this particular convention arrived at. So it is the global agreement between the governments to regulate the ban on international trade. Came into force in 1975. It is, again, it is legally binding on the parties. However, equally important is does not take place of national laws. Means what? It means a nation is required to frame its own domestic laws to achieve the process of conservation. Now, which law do we have? We have the Wildlife Act 1972, which has been amended multiple times as late as last year as well. And that amendment of Wildlife Act was done in order to achieve that particular purpose. Okay, so this convention does not take place of the national laws. However, it is legally binding. Now, India has also, by the way, held a conference of parties to the sites, and it was in 1983. So, as per the sites, here also the species, they are arranged in various different appendices. So, you have three appendices, Appendix 1, 2, and 3. So, here, Appendix 1 includes the species that are in danger of extinction, which are threatened with extinction, right? There, the commercial trade is prohibited, absolutely prohibited. However, there's a caveat. The caveat is that for the import and export of these species, you require prior permission. And this is the caveat. Trade is permitted just for research, only if the origin country ensures that the trade will not hamper the species' chance of survival, which means, let's suppose I have a country A, I have a country B. Now, country A, if it is trying to export a particular species purely for research, right? So then A has to be responsible. So in that case, A is responsible to ensure that the export would not harm the species survivability. So if I have a question, if a question can be framed from this, that for Appendix 1 species in CITES, there is no trade which is allowed. So no trade is allowed will be incorrect. Commercial trade is prohibited will be correct, right? But trade can be allowed only under certain circumstances. So in this case, now if you analyze, let's suppose Iran and India. So in that case, if for research activities, etc., if let's say Iran provides that to India, a particular kind of species, Iran has to ensure that the species, their survivability won't be at risk at all. Okay. Then you have Appendix 2. Now, Appendix 2 are those species that aren't facing imminent extinction but need monitoring. Trade permits are obtained legally. Then you have Appendix 3, species protected at least in one of those countries where that trade is supposed to happen. So it might not be under protection in one of the origin countries or the destination country, but in one of them, there has a significant amount of protection which has been provided. Regulations for these species will vary, but typically the country that requested the listing can issue export permits for that. How some countries allow hunting like elephants and big cats. So big cats, they are not allowed to be hunted anywhere now. There is no hunting for the big cats. So you have big game, small game hunting, which is done. It is in certain cases, if you apply for license and you take regulation in India also, that is done. So this is about trade, my dear friends. Please understand, this is for trade. When you trade from one region to another, that is where this will be enforceable. That is where it will swing into action. Okay, I hope we are able to make that distinction. Then the conference of parties, here again, the conference of parties to CITES happens every 2 to 3 years. 19th meeting of the COP to CITES was held in Panama City, in Panama. It was also what was referred to as the World Wildlife Conference. It was given the name only for the COP19. And here in this, it accepted a proposal to include sea cucumbers in Appendix 2 to the convention. Now, sea cucumbers are relevant. If you talk about sea cucumbers, now these sea cucumbers are important for the marine ecosystem. They do appear like these are basically the ones, the species of organisms that you will find in the marine areas. They are detritivores. So they help in degradation of the organic matter. So they help maintain the health of the marine ecosystem. Maintain the health of marine ecosystem. So this is basically by two measures. One is they are no, elephants are not allowed to be traded. They are put under Appendix 1. So here they are useful in the decomposition or degradation of organic matter. And secondly, the other help is basically that they create where they increase by excretions, etc. They increase the alkalinity of marine waters and help maintain the pH. Okay, so they prevent the acidification of water, oceans that we have talked about. Prevent acidification of oceanic water. So that is the significant role played by the sea cucumbers. But for the past few years, sea cucumbers have been illegally traded and trafficked. The destination for almost all the illegal trade is China and few countries in East Asia. So almost all the illegal trafficking and trading, be it of the plants, be it of the animals, everything, the destination eventually has to be in some or the other forms China. So there, that trade was being happening, or illegal trafficking was happening. So that is why Australia was one of those nations which raised this concern, and then it has been put under Appendix 2. Now, India's shisham. Shisham is a tree. So, shisham is which kind of tree? When we talk about shisham in the classification of forests, which kind of tree can shisham be classified into? Are we aware of that? So, shisham is a not evergreen. No. It is your moist deciduous. It is a moist deciduous forest. Right? It is included in the Appendix 2 of the convention because a lot of illegal trade, because shisham is also something very important and very valued for the various different aspects of commercial utility of the wood and timber. So that is where shisham is significantly used. So that is where it has been included in this. Okay. Then we come to WWF. This is important only for your prelims. Only. So here, now, in this case, you will find that it is the world's biggest international non-profit organization established in 1961. It has got partnership with people, bodies, and the governments worldwide. Works in areas of climate, food, forest, freshwater, and the other such natural areas. Generally focuses on rhinos, whales, elephants, tigers, the conservation of giant pandas, sea turtles, everything they look upon through one or the other initiative. Now, another portion which is relevant for your examination of prelims is that the report that it furnishes, and that is the Living Planet report. It is published every 2 years. Okay, this is relevant for your prelims, important for your prelims. Okay, keep that in mind. Then you have traffic. Now, traffic is again going to carry out almost a similar purpose like sites. So the purpose or the objective is almost similar. So trade record analysis of flora and fauna in commerce to analyze that, which are, so just now I made a statement that for majority of the illegal trafficking and trade, the destination is China. So it is to analyze that where these trade patterns are happening, where is it that all the trade is destined to, where is it that it is going. So that is where it is a joint program of WWF and IUCN established in 1996. So WWF and IUCN, initiative by WWF and IUCN. This is needed to be recalled. Focus on species trade. Now support the international wildlife trade treaties. And here, leopard, tiger, peacock, feather trade, etc. Everything is tracked, that where it is being sent to, where it is being utilized, from where hunting and poaching is happening. If you analyze that, then you will be able to find a pattern that why that processes are happening in the first place. And then maybe you'll be able to put a stop to it. Now, a similar aspect, that is SAWIN, that is South Asia Wildlife Enforcement Network. This also talks about the illegal trade which is happening, trafficking which is happening, and keeps a track of that. Okay. Then let's discuss some of the PYQs now. Is all provided in additional PPT? What additional PPT are we talking about? Are you talking about the additional reading material or something else here? In the additional reading material, it should be there, but the PPT in itself would be sufficient in this case. So, if rainforests and tropical forests are the lungs of the earth, then surely wetlands function as its kidneys. Which one of the following functions of wetlands best reflects the above statement? The water cycle in the wetlands involves surface runoff, subsoil percolation, and evaporation. Algae form the nutritional base upon which fish, crustaceans, mollusks, birds, reptiles, and mammals thrive. Wetlands play a vital role in maintaining sedimentation, balance, and soil stabilization. Aquatic plants absorb heavy metals and excess nutrients. Which of them ensure or play a role whereby wetlands function as the kidneys? Do we need a poll or do we arrive at the answer straight away? Let me know. Kidneys, what is the role that they do? They purify the blood, they take in the excess amount of various different impurities, right? So you have the wetlands. In the wetlands, the aquatic plants, they do absorb heavy metals and the excess nutrients. Then biorock technology is talked about in which of the following situations? Restoration of damaged coral reefs, development of building materials using plant residues, identification of areas for exploration or extraction of shale gas, providing salt lakes for wild animals in forests or protected areas. What is the role of biorock technology? Good. So majority of you have given the correct answer here. So it is restoration of damaged coral reefs. Now, something that we just studied. With reference to the IUCN and the sites, which of the following statements are correct? IUCN is an organized organ of the United Nations and CITES is an international agreement between various governments. IUCN runs thousands of field projects around the world to better manage natural environments. CITES is legally binding on the states that have joined it, but its convention does not take the place of national laws. So, which of them will be correct? Hmm. So, we have a random seen here. So IUCN is not an organ of the United Nations. Okay, IUCN, which was established in 1948, it is not an organ of UN. IUCN runs thousands of field projects around the world to better manage natural environments. CITES is legally binding on the states that have joined it, but the convention does not take place of the national laws. Okay. Which of the following adds or add carbon dioxide to the carbon cycle on the planet Earth? So, which of them will add carbon dioxide to the planet Earth? Volcanic action, respiration, photosynthesis, decay of organic matter. Which of them will be adding carbon dioxide? Yes, Sridevi, that is correct. Correct. Okay. Good. So, other than photosynthesis, all of them will add, because in photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is consumed and basically the oxygen is produced. So, photosynthesis is the only one which does not add carbon dioxide. And these are simple questions, guys. Okay. Consider the following statements in respect of traffic. Traffic is a bureau under United Nations Environment Program. Mission of traffic is to ensure that trade in wild animals is not a threat to conservation of nature. We have just now looked at it about traffic, but we also looked at IUCN and sites, but many of you committed mistakes there. Good. So here, basically, first statement is incorrect because traffic is by the IUCN and WWF. Now, when we talk about the purpose, that is that trade in wild animals, they are not impacting the natural conservation. In the context of solving pollution problems, which is or are the advantage or advantages of the bioremediation technique? It is a technique of cleaning up pollution by enhancing the same biodegradation process that occurs in nature. Any contamination with heavy metals such as cadmium and lead can be readily and completely treated by bioremediation using microorganisms. Genetic engineering can be used to create microorganisms specifically designed for bioremediation. Okay. So here majority of you have given the incorrect answer. So it is a technique of cleaning up the pollution by enhancing the same biodegradation process that occurs in nature. That will be correct. Any contaminant, any contaminant with heavy metals such as cadmium and lead can be readily and completely treated. Now there are two red flags in this particular statement. So there can be many different types of contaminants. Can all the contaminants completely be treated? No. Then, genetic engineering can be used to create microorganisms specifically designed for bioremediation. Yes, so you can have genetic engineering method to create oil zapper, oilivorous, etc. So here you will have C1 and 3 only. Then, Miyawaki method is well known for The promotion of commercial farming in arid and semi-arid areas, harvesting wind energy on coastal areas and sea surfaces, development of gardens, genetically modified flora, and creation of mini forests in urban areas. Which of this is for Miyawaki? Yes, correct. Correct. So here, almost all of you have given the correct answer. That is D. Right? So that is the creation of mini forests in the urban landscape. Then, in the context of mitigating the impending global warming due to anthropogenic emissions of carbon dioxide, which of the following can be the potential sites for carbon sequestration? Abandoned and uneconomic coal seams, depleted oil and gas reserves, subterranean soil, deep saline formalities. Which of them can be utilized for carbon sequestration? Again, that's something that we have covered in significant detail. Good. So here, all three of them, they are the sources, or they are basically a kind of a geological sequestration which is carried out. All three of them, they are carried out as a part of geological sequestration. After this, consider the following: carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxide, ozone, sulfur dioxide. Excess of which of the above in the environment is or are the causes of acid rain? Now, this is a question that UPSC has repeated in the prelims itself. So, UPSC has asked this question twice in the prelims. Correct. But I guess this is an easier question. Here, I expect almost all of you to get it correct. Good. So, it is nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide. So, you have the formation of nitric acid and sulfuric acid which gets created. Now, it is here that I want you to apply your logic in this case. Apply your logic. Now, I understand that elimination method is not something that you can rely upon anymore, but in this you can. So, in the guideline statements, context of WHO, consider the air quality. So, the in 24-hour mean of PM 2.5, the 24-hour mean of PM 2.5 should not exceed 15 microgram per meter cube. An annual mean of PM 2.5 should not exceed 5 microgram per meter cube. In a year, the highest levels of ozone pollution occur during the periods of inclement weather, means bad weather. PM10 can penetrate the lung barrier and enter the bloodstream. Excessive ozone in the air can trigger asthma. Which of these are correct? Yes, correct. In this, minority of you have given the correct answer. So in this, in a year, the highest level of ozone pollution occurs when? In the sunny conditions, when the sun is significantly present. So inclement weather, this is incorrect. Inclement means bad weather. So the second statement will be incorrect. PM10 can penetrate the lung barrier and enter the bloodstream. Absolutely incorrect. It is PM2.5 which can do that. We have discussed that. Excessive ozone in the air can trigger asthma. So we know that 4 is correct, 2 and 3 is incorrect. PM and the 1 will also be correct. Okay. Now, again in this also, I want you to apply your logic here. Ideally, this is a question for science and tech, but if you apply logic here, you can also get this question correct. Magnetite particles. What do we mean by magnetite? Magnetite, are we aware of magnetite? These are iron, yes, iron ore. So magnetite particles suspected to cause neurodegenerative problems are generated as environmental pollutants from which of the following? Brakes of motor vehicles, engines of motor vehicles, microwave stoves within homes, power plants, telephone lines. Which of them will produce magnetite? Think about it. That which can produce that magnetite or iron ore. Good. So here, microwave stoves within homes and telephone lines, these won't produce, rest of them will be producing. In the case of which of the following biogeochemical cycles, the weathering of rocks is the main source of release of nutrients. Weathering of rocks is the main source for the release of nutrients to enter the cycle. Again, a simple one. Yes. Weathering of rocks will, why will it release nitrogen? It will always release phosphorus. We have seen that the rocks don't consist of nitrogen significantly. What is understood by blue carbon? Carbon captured by oceans and coastal ecosystems, carbon sequestered in forest biomass and agricultural soils, carbon contained in petroleum and natural gas, carbon present in atmosphere. Which of them is referred to as blue carbon? Good. So here, almost all of you have given the correct answer. That is carbon captured by oceans and coastal ecosystems. Consider the following activities. Now, again, a portion of science and tech. So, but has got a cross utilization in terms of species. So, spraying in pesticides on a crop field, inspecting the craters of active volcanoes, collecting breath samples from the spouting whales. What is spouting whales? So the whales basically, when they come up into the air to breathe, I hope you are aware that they release a large amount of their breath, right, along with droplets of water. So that is the spout that they generate from the nostrils. So collecting breath samples from spouting whales for DNA analysis. At the present level of technology, which of the above activities can be successfully carried out by using drones? Okay. So it is going to be D, that all of them can be done. Breath samples. When you have breath samples, you can have DNA analysis. So the whales, they come up above water to breathe and then they again go down, right? So when they come up above water, that is when they will release their breath, and then they hold their breath and again they come up to release their breath. That is how the whales, they carry out respiration. So whenever they again come up, they will release that spray that will be captured. Okay. Inspecting the craters of active volcanoes. So obviously, when we talk about the active volcanoes, whether the crater has got molten materials in it or not, you will not physically go there to check it. You will deploy drones. You can deploy drones to do that. That is the aspect of it. Okay. Which of the following are the reasons or the factors for exposure to benzene pollution? Automobile exhaust, tobacco smoke, wood burning, using varnished wooden furniture, using products made of polyurethane. Which of them are reasons for benzene pollution? Good. All of them. All of them are the reasons for that. Lichens, which are capable of initiating ecological succession even on a bare rock, are actually a symbiotic association of. This I expect all of you to get it right. This is the easier one. Good. It is algae and fungi. On the planet Earth, most of the fresh water exists as ice caps and glaciers. Out of the remaining fresh water, the largest proportion, where is the largest proportion found for the fresh water other than glaciers and ice caps? This also we have had a discussion when we were discussing about the water pollution. Yes. Good. So it is exists as groundwater. Then, in the grasslands, trees do not replace the grasses as a part of an ecological succession in a grassland because of insects and fungi, limited sunlight and paucity of nutrients, water limits and fire, none of the above. So, why is it that in the grasslands you don't have so much trees, but the prevalence of grasses and not the growth of the trees significantly? Correct. Yes. So it is because of the water limits and fire. Sunlight will not be limited in the grassland region. Sunlight is available in plenty of quantity. Okay, so that is not a limitation. With reference to food chains in ecosystems, consider the following statements. A food chain illustrates the order in which a chain of organisms feed upon each other. Food chains are found within the population of a species. A food chain illustrates the number of each organism which are eaten by the others. Yes, correct. So it is one only. I see in majority of you, when in almost all the answers, you are always marking 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, so that there is a kind of a hit and trial that at least one will get correct. So that is not always going to be the case. So food chain illustrates the order in which the organisms they feed upon each other. Food chains are found within a population. No, between different species you find a food chain. It is not as if one tiger will consume the other tiger. The food chain illustrates the number of each organisms. No, that is done by ecological pyramid. Okay. And this is something that we discussed earlier, that acid rain is caused by the pollution due to nitrous oxide and sulfur dioxide. Which of the following terms describes not only the physical space occupied by an organism, but also its functional role in the community? Not only the physical space, but also the functional role. Yes, correct. Correct. Good. It is what we refer to as the ecological niche. Okay. So that is the aspect of few of the PYQs. Few of the PYQs we'll be discussing after this module as well. Then we'll come to this module and we'll proceed further. Okay. So before that, we take a break and we take a snacks break. We'll be back by around 6:05. So take a break of 20 minutes and then we are going to be back. Okay. This is the leaderboard for that point of time. Okay. So Avni and Ankit and Arundhati. Good. Okay. So that is where we'll take a break. We'll come back in around 20 25 minutes. We'll start by 6:05.